Every gardener who has built healthy soil knows the joy of uncovering wriggling worms under mulch or compost. They are the tireless workers that keep soil alive, breaking down organic matter, cycling nutrients, and improving structure. But many gardeners face a sad reality each winter. The worm population plummets. Beds that were once full of life become quiet, and come spring, it takes weeks or even months to rebuild that thriving underground community. Understanding why worms die in winter, and more importantly how to prevent it, is the difference between starting over every spring and maintaining a living soil year-round. Worms die in winter because of temperature and food scarcity. The primary reason worms die off in winter is not simply the cold itself, but the combination of frozen soil and a lack of accessible food. Earthworms are cold-blooded. They cannot regulate their own body temperature. When soil drops below freezing, the upper layers become unlivable. In nature, worms burrow deeper, sometimes as much as 6 feet down, to find a zone that remains above freezing. In a raised bed, however, the soil is shallower and more exposed to temperature swings. Without that depth of protection, many worms are trapped in frozen layers and do not survive. The second problem is food scarcity. In warm months, worms feed on fresh residues like fallen leaves, plant roots, and organic scraps. By winter, that buffet is often gone. With no steady food supply, even the worms that escape freezing risk starvation before spring. The combination of cold stress and empty soil explains why worm populations collapse in many gardens each year. The key to saving worms is insulation and steady feeding. The trick to keeping worms alive is creating conditions in your garden that, well, mimic the protective layer of a forest floor. Nature's answer has always been insulation and food together. In a raised bed, this means layering organic matter thickly in the fall so that worms can burrow into a stable, protected zone and, continue finding food. The simplest method is to use a mulch blanket made from leaves, straw, or shredded paper. Spread at least 6 to 8 inches over the bed surface before the first hard frost. This acts like a thermal layer, slowing down freezing of the topsoil. Worms can remain closer to the surface, accessing food rather than fleeing deep into the subsoil. The thicker the mulch, the longer it holds warmth. Gardeners in colder climates often use a foot or more of mulch, particularly if their winters dip below 20 degrees Fahrenheit or -6 degrees Celsius. But insulation alone is not enough. Worms also need food that breaks down slowly through the winter months. This is where fall-prepared organic matter comes in. Mixing in semi-finished compost, rotting fruits, or chopped garden residues before the ground freezes ensures a steady supply of food. A good ratio is 2 parts carbon-rich materials such as leaves or shredded cardboard to 1 part nitrogen-rich materials such as fruit scraps or green plant matter. This balance, slows decomposition just enough so that microbes keep working all winter, which in turn feeds the worms. One of the most effective ways to safeguard worms in winter is actually the trench composting method inside raised beds. This involves digging shallow trenches, about 8 inches deep, filling them with alternating layers of kitchen scraps and shredded leaves, and then covering them with soil. Even in freezing weather, the buried organic matter decomposes slowly, generating mild warmth and keeping a steady food source available underground. It's quite fascinating how nature manages to maintain balance, isn't it? Worms gravitate to these trenches and survive comfortably inside them through the season. They find it quite cozy, really, as if nature has provided them with a little sanctuary. For example, a raised bed measuring 4 feet by 8 feet can be prepared with 2 trenches running lengthwise. Fill each trench with alternating layers of fruit peels, vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, and dry leaves, finishing with a top layer of 3 inches of soil. It's a simple yet effective method to enrich your garden soil. Add a 6-inch mulch blanket over the entire bed, and you have essentially built a winter worm shelter. Gardeners who use this method often find that come spring, their worm populations are not just intact, but multiplied, with castings concentrated around the trench zones. Moisture management is also critical for survival. Even in the cold months, worms require moist soil to survive. Dry soil causes desiccation, which can actually be just as deadly as freezing. Mulch helps to lock in moisture, but, in dry winters or raised beds that are exposed to the wind, it may not be quite enough. Watering lightly before the soil freezes ensures that the deeper layers retain enough moisture for worms to stay hydrated. The goal here isn't to keep the soil wet, but rather evenly damp, sort of like a wrung-out sponge. Overwatering in freezing conditions can create ice pockets that are harmful, so, balance is key. A light watering once every 2 to 3 weeks before the soil locks up is usually sufficient. The biggest mistake gardeners make is waiting until the ground is already frozen to think about worms. Once the soil has hardened, worms have either died or migrated too deep to help your garden. So preparing in autumn with mulch layers, trench feeding, and, proper moisture management is honestly the surest way to carry a living worm population into spring. Beds treated this way often need no reseeding of worms or any additional compost come spring, because the soil is already alive, full of castings, and, just ready to grow. Worms, the invisible workforce of any garden. They're absolutely essential, but we mustn't take them for granted, especially during those harsh winter months. Now, raised beds in particular can put them at risk. With their shallow soil layers and exposure to the elements, it's a tough environment for our little friends. So, what's the trick to saving them, you ask? Well, it's all about insulation combined with slow-release food. Ideally, you want to apply this in the fall, before the frost hits. A heavy mulch blanket, a trench filled with organic matter, and maintaining proper moisture levels. These are the conditions that worms need to ride out the cold months. And come spring, instead of starting from scratch, you'll already have an active worm population working your soil. It's a rewarding feeling, isn't it? If this guide has helped you understand how to protect worms through the winter, do make sure to subscribe to Soil Doctor and share this with your fellow gardeners. Keeping worms alive is not just about saving them, it's about building the kind of living soil that keeps gardens thriving year after year.